you can do it only in 24 hours time. If you don't do it until tomorrow at 14 hours, then it is impossible to take any other issues in discussion. So these are 2 points which I wanted to make very clear. So Peter Proof is not here yet, but we shall discuss about that during lunchtime, during our meeting. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Metropolitan. Before the end of the session will be an announcement where the committee will meet, in which saal, in order not to be lost in the house. There is a blue card, please. Yes.
Very briefly, please. I'm Festus Asana from Cameroon. Since the moderator of that session has just spoken about the procedure, I'll not go without saying this. There is a situation in Cameroon for which we cannot be silent. I believe that the voice of the World Council of Churches is very powerful, and that when we make a statement about anything, we may think that nobody cares where the issues are concerned, but I tell you, it has a strong effect. There are killings in Cameroon virtually every day. If it's not by a stray bullet, then you are targeted. The English-speaking population is the target. I cannot tell you the long story, but many of you may know that there are 2 regions which speak English. 8 speak French. Now the English-speaking population is suffering. Many people are living in the forest in the rainy season, and their villages have been burnt down. Even if people commit a crime, they should be pursued and punished, and not a whole village or a whole region reduced to nothing. It would be good if WCC makes a statement about this, because it is continuing. CNN is saying nothing. BBC said something the other day. But to be brief, I will let it go at this point. But we pray that this committee can take it up.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Any other comment? But please, you have the right, if you want to submit to the subcommittee your request, you can do until tomorrow, 2 o'clock, as the moderator.
We don't have cards.
Yes.
Can the stewards make sure people have the cards?
Just to thank the chair and all the assembled members, and to say that an occasion like this is a period of grace and blessing.
Who is this?
The fact of adding voice to the problems of the world through the public domain, through the Public Issues Committee, is something we should all take very seriously. The World Council of Churches is the voice of many voiceless people. And what I heard about Cameroon, I would want to really confirm. But besides Cameroon, its neighbor, a country called Nigeria, where I also come from, many of you know about this, is confronted with a massive fundamentalist crisis that has taken a religious nature through Fulani cow herdsmen that take lands away from rural people, mainly Christians. So whether it is economic or social, the religious dimension is now there. I would think that this type of situation and many others will bear the sympathy of the World Council of Churches in what my brother who spoke before me had said gives and adds voice to the voiceless.
Thank you.
My name
Thank
is Obiora
Thank
Ike,
you.
and here as a partner organization of Globe Ethics, at globeethics.net. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please continue, microphone 4.
Okay. Theodora Isa from the Syrian Orthodox Patriarchate of Antioch. With thanks, I have seen the notes given for discussion in the public issues, but it was with great regret that I couldn't see anything in reference to what is going on in the Middle East. Yes, we know it might have eased a little bit, but there is a big danger, as His Holiness Moran Mora Afrem II has just mentioned in his guest speaker note about the possibility of having the Christianity evaporated from the Middle East. It is the place where Christianity has been established, and there is a chance, a big chance, because the percentages has gone down. We have people who have migrated, number of people have really reduced, churches destructed, and all these things, but there is no mention about the Middle East. There is no mention of Yemen. It is a disaster there. Syria, Iraq, recently they have just burned all the papers of the election. They were about to recount them, but it has just been burned. What's democracy? What's going on? So as the Council of Churches, you have to really talk about these things, because Christianity has been originated in the Middle East, and we shouldn't forget that. I understand the other countries are important, but we shouldn't forget the Middle East. We shouldn't just concentrate on Jerusalem. Jerusalem is a problem, I understand, but Jerusalem is also part of the Middle East. So we shouldn't forget other places.
Thank you.
Hopefully others agree. Thank you very much for
Thank you
listening.
very much. Okay, we close. Ariette, please.
Henrietta Huta Barat Lebang from Indonesia. I think some have been mentioned about the growing radicalism. It's not only in Indonesia, but it becomes a global network of the radicalization of and politicization of religion. I hope this committee give the attention to this issue, as it happened in many places of the world, just like in Indonesia, recent terrorist attack happened. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. I think the members of the committee have heard very carefully what our sisters and brothers share with us. And now we come now to the reports, first of all of the Madam Moderator, and then the General Secretary. I would like just to inform you, because of the time, it will not be the floor open for interaction or questions. This will shift in the afternoon session, at the beginning of the afternoon session, just to know, because we need also time for the introduction about the process of the search committee. But at the beginning of the afternoon session, we'll have time for questions to both reports. Please, Agnes.
Thank you, Moderator. I'll not be making an address. I just make a few comments on this topic. Dear brothers and sisters in Christ, it is a great joy that we can all be at this important 64th Central Committee meeting, whose theme is working and serving together for peace and justice. Karibuni, welcome to all of you. I thank God for giving us this opportunity to reflect on and celebrate the achievements of the past 70 years in working for Christian unity and action. The pilgrimage of justice and peace that we launched as the WCC back in 2013 has continued to be vital in responding to God's call for unity, mission, justice, and peace. Therefore, this Central Committee meeting has a special character in terms of our celebration of the 70th anniversary, and this year, 2018, it will continue to form the basis of our anniversary activities together with member churches and the wider ecumenical fellowship. Another dimension of our meeting this time around is working together as we review our performance of the mandate given to us by the last assembly. Midway on the journey to the next assembly, we are reminded to look back, to look at where we are, and to look to the future. Finally, this Central Committee meeting is special because we are halfway also in terms of not only our meeting together, but we are expected to make critical decisions that will guide the future of the Council. We are thus at a time when we are once again reminded of our transitional nature as an organization. My comments will look at the theme in terms of the ecumenical landscape and the gracious spaces where we have worked and served together for justice and peace. I will also try to look at areas of concern regarding the state of governance, specifically democracy and the attendant dilemmas and threats that democratic governance is experiencing. I'll conclude my comments by reminding us of the importance to step up our resolve and our commitment in order to move together toward justice and peace. What does the Lord expect of us? The theme, working and serving together for peace and justice, evokes aspirations of a world free of injustices, free of divisions, and free of conflicts. With what was happening worldwide back in 2013, we felt that it would be a perfect response by the Council, the wider ecumenical fellowship, and the people of goodwill. This being our 70th anniversary, it must be said that there has never been a better time to reflect on the importance of working together as churches towards a peaceful and just society. We are experiencing an increase in polarization, a widening gap between the rich and the poor, climate injustice, racism, xenophobia, extremism, violence, and gender inequality, among many other trends. It is reminiscent of that time when God's prophet Micah, in Micah 6:8, asked the question, what does the Lord expect of us? As we share our narratives on the theme, God tells us through his prophet that God wants not only trust and faith among his people, but also a strong solidarity. God is watching us to see if we have solidarity strong enough to help build bridges, save the earth, reconcile, heal, and transform the lives of millions of people all over the world. Gracious spaces for joint journeys. As we gather here, I'm delighted to acknowledge various efforts that we made toward our goals as a council. For many of us, the pilgrim team visits that we embarked on have enabled us to work together in our ministry of presence, listening, praying, and supporting the victimized as they shared their narratives in the different parts of the world. There are a number of such highlights that continue to give us hope in our efforts towards a peaceful and just world. Some of these are contained in our program reports and will be shared during the thematic plenaries. First, South Sudan has provided space for accompaniment as well as ecumenical and interfaith solidarity. Yet, despite our focus on and intensified ecumenical efforts with the people of South Sudan, it is sad to observe what continues to happen there. It is indeed unfortunate that the youngest country in the world does not enjoy the peace that it has long sought. The South Sudan conflict remains a source of displacement and the dislocation of millions, destruction of property, the loss of so many lives. With both sides of the conflict unwilling to compromise, thousands of children, the elderly, the women continue to bleed and die. And we cannot imagine the type of rape and violence that are meted out on these innocent people. Years of youthful life are being lost in a battle for power, status, and greed. We are thankful for the humble and God-fearing people like those of the South Sudan Council of Churches and its leaders in creating platforms for peace talks in the country. There is still much to be achieved in the now revitalized Intergovernmental Authority for Development-led talks. And so in this space, we witness the ecumenical family having to ascend to its calling to work and serve for justice and peace amidst confusion. Brothers and sisters, this is a space that is providing new momentum to work together on new parts of multilateral cooperation, which is necessary for lasting solution, for lasting peace. Additionally, the Syrian war, which has engulfed the Middle East, is another space where churches in the Middle East, and especially Europe, have had to marshal courage to work together to save lives and face political powers in order to receive refugees. Alas, it is tragic that so many lives have been lost on the journeys. Meanwhile, the challenges of integration surfacing in host countries remind us of the need to continue ecumenical collaboration and engagement with other actors in society in order to ensure we remain on track insofar as humanitarian assistance, justice, and peace are concerned. It is our duty within these spaces to continue urging NATO allies and the Syrian government to break the cycle of violence. It is our considered view that airstrikes lead to loss of life on both sides of the war, and a just and sustainable peace for all Syrians can only be brought about through a political solution. Once again, the WCC and churches in Syria and the region have a vital role to play in healing trauma, building bridges, working for justice and peace, and nurturing social cohesion. Furthermore, we remain optimistic and hopeful that our constructive engagement and accompaniment for a peaceful solution in the Korean Peninsula will in the long term yield fruit. I think as you've seen our brothers and sisters here, we are encouraged and we can be in a celebrative but also discernment mode. Once again, this is a space that requires us to acknowledge our vulnerability and fragility on the journey and the need for humility as we serve together. Millions of lives are at stake. Perhaps this is the one region, that is Northeast Asia, where our insights on joint initiatives and prayers to avert the buildup of armaments, especially nuclear arms, should inform our ongoing work. Misuse and abuse of religion. The trend of violence across the globe has significantly taken on a religious camouflage where we see churches and mosques being burnt and believers killed. The introduction of this type of religious wars is not new to us. While we are cognizant of the many global, national, and even grassroots interfaith activities to address this trend, perhaps this is a growing space for working together with people of other faiths that we must intentionally strengthen insofar as forums that will enhance interfaith relations are concerned. As much as there are diverse religious traditions, they should not be causes for conflict and victimization. No one has prayed for thunder to come down and wipe out another religion here today. It is commendable to see Pope Francis bridging the gap for peaceful coexistence with our Muslim brothers and sisters. By just accompanying a Muslim imam and a Jewish rabbi to the Dome of the Rock back in 2014, the Pope continued to show us what it really means to walk and serve together. His visits have set the pace for an inclusive religious attitude all over the world. Never before in history has the intrinsic link between an authentic religious attitude and the great good of peace become evident to all of us as it is now. Interfaith work remains a major piece for the WCC, especially given the development of Islamophobia in some of our countries. Our work towards justice and peace means working with communities to develop attitudes and values around unity in diversity. Spaces for gender justice. Around the world, communities of women are rising up to the task of working and serving together for justice and peace as their efforts get recognized. The Pilgrimage of Justice and Peace visit to Colombia exposed participants to an ecumenical group that works across denominational and ideological lines for justice and peace. This trend is growing in our communities as women seek to work both at peace building and conflict resolution through mediation and dialogue. The WCC, together with member churches, empowers religious women to use tools provided by the United Nations in advocating rights and gender justice. We are all aware of the Thursdays in Black campaign, operating through the simple gesture of wearing black on Thursdays. It is an expression of the desire for safe societies, free of rape, shooting, verbal abuse, and discrimination due to our gender or sexual orientation. We still have a lot to be done on this front by urging governments and faith communities to develop policies that will create a just society of equality between men and women globally. What then is at stake? Democratic governance. Recent years have witnessed a decline in the values and ethos of democratic governance due to the weakening of democratic structures across the world that were put in place after World War II. We are in many ways witnessing democracy and democratic governance under serious threat and even siege. To begin with, the global north, especially Europe, has a growing tendency towards conservative nationalist political parties that have found space in national parliaments. Meanwhile, in the global south, not least in Africa, democracy remains a shell, with elections ushering in politically motivated violence and conflict. Moreover, a number of African governments are reviewing their constitutions, especially regarding the tenure of presidents. At the United Nations level, although nation states are meant to participate equally, and participation in the Security Council is shared on a rotation basis, the veto power, however, still rests with only 5 countries. With emerging politics of identity, where values of truth-telling and compassion are waning quickly, people of faith have to once again rise up to the task of providing guidance on this matter. It is therefore incumbent upon churches and civil society to work and serve together in realizing stronger democratic institutions as visualized at the founding of the World Council of Churches back in 1948. It is everyone's hope that his or her views are heard. People, regardless of their faith, want to participate in fairly determining who their leaders should be. So, the increasing cases of incumbents wanting to retain power while at the same time continuing to oppress men and women of opposing views is unfortunate indeed. Together for Gender Justice. We have many things and milestones to celebrate when we look at our journey together as men and women in church and society, and aspirations towards the just community of men and women. The pace of the work has, however, been rather slow. A number of hurdles remain on the pathway, and they include crafting policy frameworks that can systematically and coherently affirm the dignity of men and women, boys and girls. Power relations between men and women remain asymmetrical. There is a need for continued empowerment of communities and churches to use new lenses and understand what society is losing by not utilizing the talents of more than 51% of its population. Now, 20 years after the launch of the Decade of Churches' Solidarity with Women, we are challenged to walk side by side as men and women toward just, peaceful, and participatory communities and churches. In many ways, it demands that we review our culture and understanding of masculinity. Both community and religious organizations should work to establish inclusive, safe, and facilitative spaces for their decision-making towards a just and sustainable economy. Our work together must build on the momentum of the Paris Climate Accord and the United Nations 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. The gap between the rich and the poor is not narrowing, but widening. Even in countries where the gross national product is growing, we see serious cleavages. On the other hand, the rise of public-private partnerships means that there are fewer resources in the form of development aid. It is estimated that there is a funding gap of 29% of the amount required to assist 4 major humanitarian situations. These are situations like Yemen, just to mention, Syria, with decreasing levels of aid, massive corruption in some countries, and inadequate climate resilience and adaptation strategies. Justice and peace remain dim hopes in the lives of many. As much as we hope to achieve peace and prosperity together, we need to understand that creating platforms for economic justice is an imperative that the ecumenical movement and ecumenical family must step up. Historical injustices and the resurgence of racial discrimination continue to cast a shadow on progress in WCC and other ecumenical initiatives, and thus the need to be addressed. Together and in solidarity with other people of good faith, we have the potential to offer a foundation for addressing issues such as refugees, migration, and economic inequality. Our task is entirely to continue serving together, to reclaim the dignity and rights of all people as the basis for how we live together, and urging nation states to respect international law. Without justice and peace, we cannot pursue our calling toward the unity of humankind and the church. I strongly believe that churches and civil society can help strengthen confidence, open doors for cooperation and dialogue that will keep trade wars from escalating, halt the marginalization of women, and form a level playing field for full realization of economic development and promote climate justice as balance in natural ecosystems is restored. The long journey. In conclusion, working and serving together for justice and peace has been and remains a long journey. There are moments when it is and will be tiring, torturous, and sometimes dangerous. In a refugee camp, children from South Sudan apparently had prayed several times to return home to South Sudan, but found themselves still confined in the camp and continued to ask, where is God? In many crisis-hit regions, it is common to see kids in despair, maybe physically injured, emotionally drained, and even hopelessly looking for the next meal, as in the case of South Sudanese children. God wants us to spread love, but on its own, it is just a word. That is why our theme of working together, serving together, is also a reminder that we need energy and strength that is God-given through the Holy Spirit, so that we continue to work and serve with survivors of conflict, rehabilitation of them, and ensure they get food, shelter, education, and security. Hope and empowerment. As a movement and an organization, we are more than ever called upon to be bearers of hope and vessels of empowerment of the people. To be vessels of hope and empowerment, we also empower each other on the journey towards justice and peace in order to build and strengthen bridges of trust, respect, and patience. The remaining period of service as a committee implores us to step up collaboration and networking with other faith communities, all people of goodwill, and international agencies to mitigate and end dehumanizing political, economic, and socio-cultural violence. We know it is quite difficult to handle all these things at the moment, but with strong resolve and revitalized commitment, we can continue moving forward together. Our call for unity and for the dignity of all men and women should be echoed in every corner of the world, so that the next generations will appreciate unity in diversity. Our contribution towards justice and peace as the World Council of Churches will surely increase as we push for new frontiers, setting new agendas and new initiatives that can bring real hope to a world so deprived of the values or the fruits of the Spirit that Paul writes about in Galatians 5:22. Yes, let us celebrate the many small and large strides we have made in the last 70 years. Let us also be cognizant of the daunting task that remains to secure justice and peace, as well as to invite more people to share our vision. Philippians 2:4 says, each one of you should look not only to your own interests, but also to the interests of others. Working and serving together for justice and peace is about taking care of the interests of the others. As we work and serve together, let us draw from the well of God's grace for inspiration and guidance. We are the current generation of leaders of the ecumenical movement, so everything rises with each one of us. Eyes are upon us to see our resolve, our commitment, and our concrete actions on the journey of justice and peace. May God be with us all. Amen.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, for your substantial report or address. We'll have the opportunity this afternoon to raise our questions, and those that are going to make their own comments. Now the General Secretary, this is really the report.
Just get the water.
I'll take the water, yes. Is the number document Gen 03. Those that, and the previous one of the address of the Madam Moderator, Gen 01. Those that don't have, please show your cards, then the stewards, they can give to you. Gen 01 was the moderator address, and Gen 03 is the General Secretary report. Just a moment, General. Eh? They will be online.
It should be online.
Be patient.
Should be online.
The line is busy. It's coming. It's very busy with other documents. Don't worry. And then you can ask a copy. They can distribute it. No, it's available. But not online. Please. Eh? Even not the moderators. Both of them. They will come. They will come. Just to finish this little of them, not to have this noise.
Yeah.
It's okay now, everybody has a copy, at least of the General Secretary. Show your cards, and then the stewards, they come to.
My report will be available after my speech.
Why you don't say that?
But I hope that would be available also now. But you will definitely have it after.
Okay. Then please, the stewards to finish, then we can begin. I thought that they distributed both. That was my mistake.
That was also what I thought.
Yes, or maybe now it's coming. I saw the, 03, this is the General Secretary we are looking for. You have here?
No. There is a misunderstanding.
Okay, now the General Secretary, please.
You'll get it afterwards.
You'll get, then
Relax and listen.
You can listen carefully and then take your notes. Okay, please, don't speak like this. Please, Dr. Kavas.
Yes, Your
I
Eminence.
please.
We want to follow the speech and to put
Okay,
notes on paper.
Okay,
It's very difficult for us for a 7 or 8 pages just to hear
Okay,
and put our notes.
don't be
Please,
nervous.
thank you. Distribute it now so as we can follow it.
Don't be nervous. Please, you are a medical doctor. You can have any factors, you know, here. Eh? No, we know that.
But I think they should distribute it.
Then you can sit a little.
I think we
Then,
ask the
okay, we
stewards,
make a little. Then, please,
please
you can,
distribute it.
please, the stewards, to make a little fast distribution of the paper. Yes, okay, welcome. It always makes the problem. Is okay now, everybody? Please show your cards and the stewards, they can see you. Please, oh, there are a lot. Yeah, but they make this noise, the stewards, around. Okay, we begin. Please, General Secretary.
Yeah, thank you, Moderator. Thank you, and thank you for this opportunity to address you as this august body of the Central Committee and all our guests and advisors. And we apologize for this complication, but also for the time constraints we have for other purposes in this session. I will read most of my report, but some sections where we will have issues we come back to later in the meeting, I will make them a bit shorter. But we have come to a milestone, 70 years since the World Council of Churches was established. It's also a milestone midway between our 10th and our 11th assemblies. And I would say every meeting of this body, the Central Committee, is really a milestone for the World Council of Churches. This whole meeting of the Central Committee has been prepared as a comprehensive and significant and quite public, but also quite dense event to commemorate and to consider and to celebrate the life and the work of the World Council of Churches. And as you know, in addition to that, we'll also at this milestone have a unique visit of Pope Francis at the end. So this will not be a vacation. You will not get much time to rest. But let us pause for a moment to reflect, at least, on the way that is marked by this particular milestone. When we look back, we see where we have gone, and we can analyze where we have arrived at this stage. You have been given and will be given many reports and evaluations about the last 4 years. Also about the last 2 years, what we did since we last met in Trondheim in Norway. And I would say you have also the privilege and the possibility to know every day and every week a lot about what is happening in the World Council of Churches as a fellowship, through our news releases, through our many ways of communicating. And many of you also know much more, going back almost to the all 70 years. So I will not use this precious time to tell you those stories again, but to reflect on one particular perspective. The WCC has made a difference, and in many ways we have been walking together, serving justice and peace, as we say for the theme of this meeting. We should also grasp this moment to share with one another and attend to our calling and to the challenges facing us. And how do we respond to them? But also, in this summoning, our courage to continue. There is an increased public attention to the WCC at this meeting, at this milestone, maybe more than before. And I've been asked journalists who are then preparing their attention to this meeting, what are actually the purpose and the outcome of the work of the WCC? Please tell me in a few words. And I've answered to some of them, unity, justice, and peace, and how these three are interrelated in the church and in the world at large. Well, and then they ask, how are they interrelated? And I have found no better way of describing what has motivated us. No more significant perspective than to call the WCC a unique instrument for the ecumenical movement of love. This milestone is a place where we offer thanksgiving to God. The churches in the WCC and many other churches, like the Roman Catholic Church, we are at a very different place in our relations to one another than we were 70 years ago. We might take much for granted, was not at all so in 1948. And we have seen more clearly what unites us. We have costly experiences of truth and reconciliation processes to share. We have gradually become able to understand one another better and respectfully deal with our differences. Even deep divisions based on theological convictions and historical developments can be bridged. And we have learned a lot about living together with our diversity. And we have become mutually accountable to one another and to our common calling and mission. So these 70 years have been both a blessing but also a challenge to the churches and to the world. And how has that been possible? Well, I believe it has to do with love. In the ecumenical movement, we need both perspectives of love, both the eros and agape. We need the passion for fellowship, the longing for togetherness with the other, and to be with one another. And we also need the willingness to give, to offer what we have, even to sacrifice, to be able to put the needs of the others first, following the example of Jesus Christ. And we have seen both dimensions of love. And what makes me confident in speaking about an ecumenical movement of love in these 70 years? The question of what is in this for me and for us cannot define a koinonia of love. We cannot ignore one another or withdraw our attention when it is no longer primarily serving our own interests. The blessings that come from being a fellowship of love are many. This is not a zero-sum deal for doing business together. 1 + 1 is more than 2 in the power of love. And we have been sharing our gifts from the different churches, confessions and contexts. Sharing the sufferings and the precious joys has brought new and added dimensions of being church. And therefore I've been inspired and moved by seeing these many initiatives, these agendas, and the many people carry them forward through these 70 years as their expressions of love. Genuine attempts and efforts to act in love for the fellowship and for justice and peace in the world. The challenges we have received from one another in this movement of love have changed our preconceptions about one another, but it has also dealt with the truth about one another. From the very beginning, we saw that the quest for the unity of the church has served a wider purpose: the life together in God's creation as one humanity. We have learned a lot to see that we have to continue. The mission is not completed. The urgent needs for unity, justice, and peace have driven the WCC forward. And in this perspective, I think it is proper to have this 70th anniversary as a moment of thanksgiving for being an instrument of the ecumenical movement of love. But in this perspective, we can also accept, we can even embrace and celebrate that there are imperfect but real and diverse expressions of unity and shared service for justice and peace. Even if our unity is imperfect, it has dimensions driven by the love of Christ to us and to all humankind and to the whole creation. So this time we are asked to reflect on what we have been able to contribute or not contribute, as we also pass midway the two assemblies. And having the privilege to live here and also live in Bosse, I have the privilege to look at the Alps every morning and every evening. And today I think it is time for us to not look at just one hill or one peak or one valley, but to look at the landscape as a whole and to see, be inspired, but not see the complete picture, but still see enough what we have been able to achieve together. And I'm proud of leading this team working for the World Council of Churches during this time. In that perspective of our 4 years, we can see more clearly the character of the work of this organization and of the fellowship. We also see more how the WCC can contribute. The more detailed studies of plans and reports is the task of the Executive Committee, as you know. But in the 4-year perspective, and even more in the 70th anniversary perspective, we should see also the larger landscape. And I also want to look at this landscape from a theological perspective of love. We have been helped by some of the major projects of Faith and Order, whose text will now also be made accessible in a digitized version. We will hear about that this afternoon. But we have been helped to see our fellowship as koinonia, as a shared gift, participating in the love of the triune God of life, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. God is love. The Church is invited to be one, as the Holy Trinity is one, in love. And therefore the Church is called to be the expression of this love in a broken and sinful world. And how could the ecumenical movement, trying to unite the churches in this call and to bring the signs of the reign of God, justice, peace, and joy into this world, how could this movement be something other than a movement of love? Well, we should also see at this milestone, and as we read our ecumenical history, from the perspective of the biblical call to the ministry of reconciliation. That means, as St. Paul says, for the love of Christ compels us. We have a shared gospel as our basis, corresponding to this point that St. Paul makes. And he died for all, so that those who live might no longer live for themselves, but for him who died and was raised for them. And it is this, in this perspective, I also when I started my ministry, reflected on this as a movement of the cross. The cross as a sign of God's love for all, and the cross as a sign of the challenges and the suffering, even death, that might come when we do what we are called to do as disciples of Jesus Christ. We cannot have unity of the church or an ecumenical movement without the cross. But the meaning of what we are doing is not measured in normal indicators of success, a great wind in the sails, and applause from everybody. But the true unity and service of the church cannot be anything except Jesus Christ and Him crucified. And yet, this is only possible to see in the light of the resurrection. The call to unity and reconciliation, to justice and peace, is driven by the one who died and was risen, so that those who live might no longer live for themselves. We are called to find the proper expression of the love given in Christ to us, in our way of living together. We serve the God of life, leading us to justice and peace. And therefore we have challenged the powerful and everybody who has responsibility for making decisions on behalf of many. We have spoken truth to power. We do so driven by love for all, particularly for those who are suffering, occupied, colonized, excluded, non-privileged, marginalized, and discriminated against. And it is in this perspective that we also see the very important shared ecumenical theological point, the preferential option for the poor. This axiom is expressing God's love for the world in a particularly profound and relevant way. This is our shared faith in the crucified and resurrected Jesus Christ. And therefore, I believe we are not only sharing God's love, but we are in desperate need ourselves also of this divine grace and love. And to make a personal remark, one night, almost 40 years ago, I read the text of the chapter 21 of the Gospel of John and asked God for guidance for my life. After many years, I've discovered that this chapter must be read in light of the famous words of chapter 17. The prayer that they may all be one is fulfilled in a unique expression of love. The way forward to the ministry of unity is reopened in Jesus' generous invitation to the meal at the shore for the disillusioned fishermen. This expression of love is also a call to accountability. Simon, son of John, do you love me? Yet the question of Jesus Christ is not leading to sentimentality and emotional self-preoccupation, but to a new and a wider and much more demanding task, namely to share the new sign of fellowship and unity in the meal, also with others, in all dimensions of the meal. Feed my sheep, tend my sheep. Sometimes we feel that this question is overwhelming, almost unfair. Can we really say that we love Christ? Well, Jesus Christ expects that we can, even if we feel that it is beyond our capacity. And I have to say, this story has motivated many, myself included, for the ministry in the church, and particularly in the ecumenical movement. So there is no reason to believe that we who are involved in this movement, which is meant to heal wounds and mend broken relationships, are ourselves in any less need of this divine grace and love. There is no sense in talking about the ecumenical movement of love without being honest about ourselves and realistic about the people involved in this movement as human beings, sometimes able to lose sight of the purpose and the objective of what we are here for. But Jesus Christ yet did not ask for perfectionism, but honesty and love. And the world is not in need of perfectionism, but desperately in need of love. That's also a matter of attitudes. This call to work for unity and justice and peace requires some kind of shared attitudes that make it possible to pursue such shared objectives. These attitudes can to some extent be defined, and they can be pursued, as criteria for what kind of professionalism and capacity that are needed for this particular type of work. It is not only individual and emotional dimensions of love we are talking about. Increasingly, I see the attitude of mutual accountability and its corresponding structures and practices as ways to embody the quality of relations needed for a fellowship of diversity, seeking unity in its objectives and its practices. It is a concretization of what the attitude of love means, particularly in an institutional setting like ours. So the attitude of love is more than softness and gentleness. It is the reliable and solid relationship that also allows for expression of disagreement and differences for the sake of the necessary clarity. Love means the ability to say both yes and no, and to discern when to say which, even if it sometimes hurts, for a while for some, and even for those who have to say it. But one of these characteristics of the WCC is that we are, by definition, a fellowship of diversity. Different churches, different traditions and confessions, different visions, and sometimes also expressions of unity. Another characteristic is that the WCC has embraced this diversity in our human family in terms of acknowledging the different churches, but also the different cultures, the different abilities, the different ways of expressing fellowship. And this is also the case when we have developed our methods of consensus building. This mosaic is our strength and our glory. We embrace the diversity given by God. We do so in love for one another and for God the Creator of all and whose image we bear. So the question for all of us remains, when we look at the many tasks we have in front of us, how can we express more clearly the love of God for all human beings, regardless of who they are and to which community they belong? And there I also have a reference to the report that will come in 2020 from our advisory group on human sexuality, and that we should, at that time, go deeper into these questions together. But where is the way forward? I would say we should not be wondering that the WCC has very ambitious purposes and objectives, and they should be. We have allowed ourselves to set such very ambitious objectives because it is an understanding of what we are called to do. The unity of the churches as a sign of the unity of humankind. But is it a sign of being unrealistic, over-ambitious? Is it time after 70 years to become a bit more realistic? Well, the objectives of unity, justice, and peace are not ours. They are God-given characteristics of the reign of God breaking into this world. They are genuine expressions of what the love of Christ can restore, how the cross and the resurrection together relate to the world of sin and evil, as it is, but still transforming this reality. And therefore, there is a fascinating willingness in the WCC to try to do what is right, even if it is very ambitious. These high objectives for our life, for visible unity, for the care of creation, for human dignity and rights, for a just community of women and men, for better protection of children, for health and healing, for reconciliation and peace, for mutual understanding among the religions, for end of poverty, for just distribution of wealth and resources, for involvement of all generations in these common efforts, and much more, for doing them in the inclusive and in a fair way. It's a beautiful view, and I have to admit, sometimes very demanding to lead the work of an organization with such a view. But if we understand them as expressions of how the love of Christ for us motivates us in doing this, they make a lot of sense. We have in different documents, which will come to our floor for discussions about how the strategic objectives for this period in between the two assemblies formulate this, and how the annual plans also bring them to very concrete expressions. But sometimes we have to ask and even acknowledge, how can we use our resources better and even more efficiently? I can report at least that the WCC is in a good process of developing better formulations of adequate objectives and outcome indicators as an expression of true stewardship. And in all these processes, I will interpret the efforts to make plans, to achieve these objectives, to do it, sometimes doing new things, as genuine expressions of love for those who need what we can do, the churches, the people, the earth. And I'm greatly inspired how my colleagues in the staff, but also how you as governing body and other reference groups and advisory groups, commissions and committees are driven by this overall and sometimes very ambitious but overarching ambition. These are signs of love. And then St. Paul reminds us in 1 Corinthians 13 that love is not only an idea, it is the better way to take on all issues, challenges, and tasks we are addressing as a church fellowship, as a body of Christ, seeking unity, justice, and peace. It was so 70 years ago, it is so today, and it will be so tomorrow. This is what makes it one ecumenical movement. And one way to do this is to focus on pilgrimage, to focus on diaconia, and we'll come back to that. But let me share a few words about where we are in our pilgrimage. I think it has been a challenge, a new challenge for many, to understand what this should mean and what that perspective actually brings to our work. We have discussed that several times. We see now more clarity in the theology, but also in the way of describing objectives, and in the practices and experiences of what it can mean. The reference group for the Pilgrimage of Justice and Peace, the theological study groups supporting its work, they have all contributed a lot to this. And the methodology of pilgrim visits, which is somehow following up the Living Letters methodology, but very focused now on solidarity and accompaniment, is developing. And this idea of pilgrimage is seen in the many visits made by colleagues, by groups appointed by the WCC to visit different parts of the world. And I'm also honored and privileged to see also the participation and the presence of the General Secretary representing the whole WCC and its fellowship as ecumenical pilgrimages, seeking together with you our work for unity, justice, and peace. I will not report a long list of these visits and encounters for the 2 years. These are reported and referred in the minutes of the Executive Committee. But I would definitely say we have developed this concept of the pilgrimage of justice and peace to become an overall perspective in everything we do, and to see this motive as a pilgrimage, as a motive of pilgrimage that translates as openness, as willingness to be present in the lives of others, as accompaniment, listening and acting in solidarity, as readiness for change and transformation of the surroundings and ourselves, as we in the theme of transforming discipleship in the recent World Conference on Mission and Evangelism in Arusha, Tanzania. And this is also a dominating and shared perspective in how we understand and develop ecumenical relations, which is also expressed in the motto for the visit of Pope Francis, walking, praying, and working together. This pilgrimage perspective and the pursuit of pilgrimage initiatives are characteristic of this period of work. But it is more than an idea that we can leave behind when we come to the next assembly. We need to reflect on how this approach continues, even as we move on to a new theme and a new phase in the years to come, in this moment of love. Our moderator has expressed in very strong terms and clear ways also how the World Council of Churches and the ecumenical movement as a whole is called to be a counter-movement for unity against forces of polarization, fear, and hate. We see in many ways that there are strong forces polarizing and dividing the world, and even using religious faith and identity as a tactic for dividing people. And therefore the three values of unity, justice, and peace held together in love becomes very clearly the core mission of the WCC. It has been possible to see how these are connected in the way we have pursued the idea of pilgrimage and discipleship and fellowship. And it must move on as a counter-movement to these other strong movements and forces of our time, affecting our churches as well as the world at large. The realpolitik of the church is defined by the gospel's call to love one another, to be one, to be expressions of the love of God in the Trinity, and expressed in relation to human beings seeking the truth in faith. The power of love is a message to the world. It has to be expressed in our quest for unity of the church and the unity of humankind. We cannot leave this quest for unity on a side track. We should include in all our reflections on church unity in the wider horizon of work for a sustainable, for a just and a peaceful unity in the world. And therefore the ecumenical movement of love has much to contribute to these efforts, to bring other dimensions and other proper relationships that is needed in our time. Because we know that the forces are strong. There are many and enormous powers of division and polarization, as our moderator described them very precisely. The 70th anniversary of ours comes at the same time as the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and we will have a chance to discuss a statement about that in this meeting. Let me say already here that these human rights should be the basic concern and message of all who care for the sanctity of life and for the respect for God, the creator of all human beings, wherever these persons are and whatever category some would put them in. Racism in all its forms is a human failure and sin to recognize the diversity of humankind as given by God, therefore also a sin against God. All the ways we categorize others in order to exclude or discriminate against the other are per se an attack on the faith in the God of life and love we uphold. This has become and must continue to be a priority for the WCC to combat in whatever forms it might appear. And we even see that our own high ground objectives of unity, justice, and peace sometimes will be and are reinterpreted or abused by some powers to dominate or to discriminate. Therefore, through a serious dialogue among us, but also a critical dialogue, we should discern when they are serving the love we are called to promote. Unity, for example, might become a means of enforcing an oppressive uniformity or demand for agreement or a frontier, a border, a wall against others that are not included in the protected and unified area of a country. This might even happen in the churches, not serving primarily the needs of those who are suffering and supporting those who are struggling. A reference to justice is in some cases seen as the rule of the stronger and privileged, neglecting the needs of those who are excluded from having the safety of citizenship with equal human rights. And peace, too, might be defined as an objective, but pursued by some in practices dividing and creating conflict. This might happen by getting total dominion of the other or less powerful or privileged, as we have seen in the attempts to make Jerusalem an undivided capital for Israel, before an international and bilateral agreement with the Palestinians is even on the table. So there are strong powers undermining the need to see one another as participants in the one humanity, seeking our common good and our common interests. Therefore, there needs to be somebody, like a body of the WCC, and something that represents this counterpower of unity, justice, and peace, and that expresses non-partisan universal love. In the context of the wider world, we work with the United Nations, with its many agencies, as well as other international organizations, calling for our contributions every day, more and more. We represent, as WCC, our member churches on the ground, in the many realities where change and transformation must happen. We respond daily through our comprehensive programs, such as the HAYA and the HAPI programs, in peace initiatives for all our prioritized countries, and even more. And we try to see conflicts from the side of the suffering, particularly from the perspective of children and women, from all peoples who are victims and targets of violence and armed conflicts. We are called to serve for the sake of the peace that all human beings need and deserve. And therefore we should not forget the very important reflections we shared and still share from the significant discussions and definitions on just peace, which we also brought forward in the convocation in Jamaica in 2011. They are still of high relevance and must be implemented in many ways. Like, for example, our quest for the just peace with the earth. Or, when it comes to very concrete examples, fighting nuclear weapons. In this room, we received the message some months ago that ICAN, the campaign for the banning of nuclear weapons, received the Nobel Peace Prize last year. And we were happy to show with our symbols that this is our agenda, this is our campaign and our policy in showing our love for human beings, for the civilization and for the environment, which are all threatened by any use of nuclear weapons. We will hear more about this later. The conflict in the Holy Land calls upon all who can contribute to a real and just peace. And we will address that also, as we heard, in a public statement. The anniversary of the establishment of the State of Israel and the beginning of the tragedy for the Palestinian peoples happens to be the same years as our beginning and our anniversary. The call and commitment to continue working for the people in the Holy Land and for their future in just peace continues every day in the WCC and with our partners. And therefore, we have many initiatives, and unfortunately the list mentioned in here in paragraph 59 was not complete, where we work together with you for just peace in many ways, in very concrete ways. We show also in this time a very particular attention to the situation in Korea. And I had the privilege to visit both South and North Korea last month, and we heard again how important the ongoing involvement for peace in Korea and the WCC visions for peace are inspiring the efforts we see these days. And we will have the privilege to hear more about this unique momentum for peace on the Korean Peninsula, as we hear also from media, but also from our participants from both North and South Korea these days. Miracles can happen, and we should be the people to believe them, but also to prepare them. And I think this is an important part of the legacy of the WCC these days. We have also in front of us a very important document about ecumenical diaconia, which is another way of expressing the ecumenical movement of love's deep intention. It's a way of responding to the UN's definitions of sustainable development goals, but it goes beyond that. We should with pride say that we respond and pursue many of these goals in our daily activity as WCC. But we do that also in close collaboration with our ecumenical partners, and particularly these specialized ministries we have as our strong partners, and also with ACT Alliance. Partners that participate both in bringing resources for the WCC, but also contributing together with us to address these many issues. As we will have a long conversation about this document later, I will not say more here, other than say that this is our opportunity to affirm a new step forward in this cooperation and give it a new theological basis through receiving and supporting and recommending this document. We will also have a chance to particularly relate to the ACT Alliance and our shared vision, our shared calling, in a one-day joint event between the ACT Alliance Assembly and the WCC Executive Committee on November 1st this year in Uppsala in Sweden. Let me end by a few reflections as we take concrete steps towards the 11th Assembly also in this meeting. To be convening the ecumenical movement of love not only means sharing a vision, but also take concrete steps in how we move forward. And we seek the shared wisdom and guidance we can offer together, being mindful of how we do so in a modus of love and respect, and exercising our stewardship for decisions in the best possible and reconciled way. This practice of consensus has become a gift to us and an expression of mutual respect and love. And even in issues where we, in accordance with our rules, make decisions by votes, for the sake of transparency and to secure the equal involvement of all members of this body, we need to make efforts to conduct the procedures in mutual respect and love for one another as a fellowship of churches. And this was also what the Permanent Committee on Consensus and Collaboration reminded me and also asked me to pay particular attention to in this phase. And we know that we have to make important decisions about the 11th Assembly of the WCC to be held in 2021. After the new rules, after Busan, it's only every 8 years, and it becomes therefore even more an assembly and the only opportunity we have together with all our member churches, not only of the region or the country or the confession taking a particular responsibility to host it. It should be prepared so that you all own it, that you all have access to it, that you all have resources to pursue it and can be represented. And it should be planned with a program so that you all feel at home and inspired, feel that this is a shared gathering. And it is really a serious burden for those who take the responsibility to be hosting an event like a WCC assembly. And therefore, the WCC is privileged that there are churches and groups of churches that have invited also the 11th assembly to their place. It is not only a privilege, it is a condition for the WCC to be able to have an assembly that actually some churches invite us to be there and to host it. These are very strong signs of love and care for the fellowship of churches that we represent. And therefore I want to also to honor again the two invitations from churches in South Africa and from Germany, as they represent this willingness to serve the Council in this way. And they both represent context of significance for our legacy and our high relevance for our challenges of our time as fellowship. And as we will come back to this in another session, I will not read all what I have to say, but read paragraph 71. It is important that the fellowship presented by you as our Central Committee take time to prepare and make this decision about the assembly venue in the manner of fellowship and love, but not like as a competition for one to win over the other, like in the Olympic movement. I've been asked to prepare this decision-making process towards our common decision through prayer, through deep respect, through getting the information available and to share it. And to be transparent, I think it is important that the principle and practice of rotation from region to region for these events is a sign of being a global fellowship of love and unity and should also be pursued in this case. And then I argue for what I mean about that. But also that as a Central Committee, we need to consider how do we steward the available resources for the WCC in the next 3 years in the best way. And also how can our churches that invite us for this assembly, if they are not asked to host the assembly, also be encouraged to host, for example, the next Central Committee meeting. I mentioned this in my conversation with both parties, and they are aware of my position on this. I trust that we find a way to deal with this and find a good conclusion for the whole fellowship. But we also asked to make a decision about the theme of the assembly. And as you will see in the Assembly Planning Committee's report, that the fact is known to us now that the word love was never used in an assembly theme. Two of those proposals we have now have that articulated. But we continue to steward our resources in many ways. Also, as we celebrate the 70th anniversary, we are reminded of these great assets we have here in Geneva to meet and to be present in the international institutions serving the multilateral work for justice and peace. As you know, we had to undertake a serious revision of the WCC pension fund status, and therefore also, based on that, we had to make new initiatives to make these resources of this real estate here available for the Council. This has been pursued with resilience and with also success. The value of our land is already 3 times what it was before the project started. But now we have launched it also for the next phase, for the new partners to come to as tenants and as investors. And we trust that this will help not only to save the WCC from a financial crisis and breakdown some years ago, but also to steward this property for the future generations of staff and work of the WCC. We should also mention that the chapel and this hall have been classified as historical monuments in Geneva due to their special history and architecture. And every time we meet here, we add to this history and its value. Let me end by a personal remark. I love the work of the WCC, and I love to work with my colleagues and with you as governing bodies as General Secretary. And I do so in deep gratitude for this privilege to serve in this ministry with the trust of you and of our member churches. And I shared with the leadership of the Central Committee in due time to prepare this meeting according to our rules, whether I'm available for re-election for another term. And after prayers and a long time for reflection, my conclusion is that I cannot say yes to a third 5-year term. And due to the sequence of the Central Committee meetings, I had to make this decision actually long before the end of my term, which is the end of next year. But I do so without knowing what God called me to do hereafter. But I urge you to not see this meeting as a farewell, but to acknowledge my clear intention to continue with the present mandate you have given me and pursuing all the important tasks and processes of the WCC during this time. So let us conclude and continue by looking at ourselves as a privileged expression of the ecumenical movement of love. It is a significant dimension of how we should read our 70 years history. It is a significant dimension in shaping the role and the work of the WCC today for the sake of unity, justice, and peace. And it is the perspective that should guide the WCC towards its next assembly and beyond. Nothing less and nothing other than love. So faith, hope, and love abide, these 3. But the greatest of them is love.
Thank you, General Secretary, for your rich report. This is not a report, this is an homologia that we say in Greek. It's really your personal witness and your commitment to all these years of your ministry in this house. Dear friends, we are already, it is 1 o'clock, even more, and we have to stop here. Otherwise, the whole program will be changed. We have to restructure a little our afternoon program. And the afternoon session, we have to give the floor for those that they want a kind of interaction or questions to the address of Madam Moderator and also to the General Secretary. Then we have Yorgos Lemopoulos to introduce us on the process of the search committee, how to elect this body, as now we have officially the announcement that General Secretary will not continue for a 3rd mandate. And then the agenda as it is in the program, report from the Executive Committee, the Green Village, also project, and also to see the new member churches. We must be very disciplined this afternoon, at least to finish and not to, because the next also, I would say, session, this plenary on unity is also so important, and there is also a program for that session. Do we agree to break here? There is any news where the lunch is here, but where the Public Issues Committee will meet? Do we have? Please have lunch in the cafeteria. Sandwiches are available. Okay. And Peter, you know where the committee will meet? There is no the staff there. Come here, please.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Unfortunately, there were no available meeting rooms for public issues today. Everything is fully booked, but we have reserved a few tables in the cafeteria. I think there should be signs on the tables, so Public Issues Committee members can meet at those tables.
You meant we have lunch and meeting together, yeah?
I think
Yes.
His Eminence Metropolitan Nifon has suggested that we, as Public Issues, meet for a few minutes first and then take our lunch.
Okay. Could you have a prayer by 1 minute? We have a little time for silent. Please. A little silent, and then let's make our own prayer for